Can you hear me well? Can the audience hear?
Can someone that is an open burning yes?
Hello?
They said they're sharing the wrong screen.
Okay, let me see. What about there?
Perfect.
Okay. Can you hear me?
That's it?
Yes.
Right.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's get started, actually. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Chat is good. Okay. So very happy to introduce Diego Gómez-Zará, who is an assistant professor at Notre Dame. Diego and I met for all the PhD students here in 2017 at the very first SINS event, the Society of Young Network Scientists. And so we're part of this cohort of people who stop each other's careers. So every time there's like a paper that sounds like Diego wrote it, I'm like, Diego.
Right.
So it's really nice to have you here.
Thank
Take it
you.
away.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. And yeah, it's like interesting how life goes, because we met. I was a first year PhD student. That was NetSci in Indianapolis, and life moves on, and then it's incredible like where everyone goes later. So thank you again for having me. So I'm going to share some of our recent studies, some work about team, like my research areas about team formation, and now we're just moving forward to explore more about scientific teams. So I want to start with this idea, like teams are very important for all of us, right? You have different teams in your research projects, collaborations, in life, when you have done academia or industry. So we acknowledge like teams are very important these days for our productivity. However, the main challenge is like how we assemble those teams. And what happens, and again, because of our natural forces, sometimes we try to just team up with those who already know, who are similar to us, maybe they're from the same institution or the same country. So that is just like a big problem for those who belong to minorities or are not very well connected. So, and that's very important, because how you assemble a group, like, will have a lot of repercussions later when they need to work together. So if the team is not the best in terms of you don't have the right members, or like their dynamics are not the best because there are too many differences or too many similarities, that will affect how the team will work later. And because right now a lot of work is done online, who of you have like an online collaborator, like working with someone online, right? Yeah, many of you, right? And sometimes even like you haven't seen this person in reality, right? Just like over Zoom or over the phone, but it's still like a lot of these collaborations are mediated by technologies. So kind of like what drove me to do all this kind of research was like asking how these systems or how social technical systems can help us assemble more effective teams. So I want to go through 3 main studies today. 2 of them are part of my dissertation, which has, we're still working on just trying to get it published. This one got rejected recently at CHI. And this one, like, I think it's one of the recent ones, and we would like to hear your feedback across these 3 studies. So the first one, we were trying to understand how the social networks were affecting your chances to be part of a team. So kind of what literature tells us, like literature management and communication, is that people choose team members based on different ideas or factors. One is that this paper from Hints, basically people choose like team members based on similarity, right? If they have something in common, that increases the chances to team up together. If we know them already, because you're trying to reduce the uncertainty of conflict, risks, and so on. And competence, people trying to find who is the best or like who have the skills to succeed in the task. Another theory is social categorization, which is basically this idea like we trying to see ourselves as part of a group, like based on certain attributes. Let's say here, right, you are part of NetC, and you are building or you're working in this floor, like across the building. So that shapes that identity so you can easily interact with others. But like if you look at me, well, the only thing will be, yeah, like you are another researcher in an institution, but like we have run into each other at several conferences, right? The other one is homophily, which is like the most typical one and explains different social behavior movements, right? Like we're trying to live around with people who are look like us, or just like trying to team up with those who had certain characteristics, like same year, same cohort, same country, for example, in some universities. And social capital, right? Like in the end, the power of our networks, just like how that help us to team up or like find collaborators. So we were interested in this idea of the social capital can be described in multiple ways, but the idea here is like, it's just like the resources that we can have access to our social networks. And that has been classified in two ways. And Granotover, Putman like defined this idea like the bridging capital. So basically all the network or the ties that we have through these acquaintances, co-workers, and neighbors, and those are like the weak ties. We don't interact too much with them, but they have a special value because they can help us to find the specific opportunities, jobs, etc. And the other one is bonding capital, right? Like our close friends, family members. We have all of them, like our partners. So like this provides us support, emotional support as well. And the idea is like these ones are called the strong ties. So based on this idea, like the strong ties or the weak ties, we wanted to try and understand like how people were forming those teams, like how having those ties will affect your chances to have or be part of a team. So we have some hypotheses here. The first one is like the strength of the tie. You have heard this in multiple communication management studies, like the stronger the tie, like you are interacting more with that person or you feel more close to you. So if you have a strong tie, it's more likely that you will invite a person to be part of a team, as well as like that person will accept you as a team member. So here, like the illustration is basically A wants to team up with B. There's like a strong tie, like it's a close friend. So basically, if I ask A asks B to team up, B will say yes, compared to C, for example. C doesn't have that strength. Other idea was like to what extent people are aware of like the relationships that others have. So for example, if A wants to team up with B, it's just like thinking if this person is very well connected in the social network. And that one question is like how many weak ties this person has. So let's say Brennan, who has been coordinating this series for several months, he knows a lot of people. He has access to different institutions. So maybe teaming up with Brennan could be very interesting, right? So like one idea here is to see if people were teaming up with those who have many weak ties. And the same way, if not just necessarily because he has access to many institutions, but like maybe he has very close friends or very strong collaborators, and that will be one way just like I can team up with them. So we were testing this idea too, just like if they will team up basically because this person have a lot of close friends. And the last one, because we are also interested in this quality, this trait about leadership. Leadership is like the one mix between you as a skills as a leader, but at the same time how well you're connected or embedded in your social group. So we were trying to see if, for example, people who have some leadership experience or they were recognized as leaders, they will have more chances to be part of a team or be invited to a team. By the way, if you want to ask me questions, feel free to interrupt me, okay? So what we did, and Alina will see this and she will say, oh, I know this thing. Basically, this was a system that we developed at Northwestern. So basically, it's a recommender system called My Dream Team. And the idea here was like to assess, to help people find team members. So the idea here is that people will create a profile and we will ask them several questions about them, including traits, demographics, skills, and their social networks. And the idea here was trying to create a profile that was touching or assessing a lot of their aspects about their social capital as well as their human capital. And then once they completed the survey, everyone created their profiles and we asked them, okay, now you're free to choose whoever you want to team up. So you can search for social connections, for example, those who were very well connected, those who have a lot of friends, those who have a lot of collaborators, and so on, as well as like skills. Everyone had to self-report like how good you are at certain skill. So people were creating these search queries, and then the system was providing these recommendations based on like what are you asking for. Okay, these are like the people who we believe that could be a good team member for you. And based on this system, we were trying to create this network modeling idea. So this person is searching for team members, find someone, like I want to work with Brennan. I sent him an invitation, and Brennan could just say, you know, it's kind of Tinder. He could just swipe left or swipe right? So like you can just say yes or no. And basically on that, we're trying to see how this network was forming. Just like all these invites will just forming like will be a small network, but in that sense, all these hubs of individuals who are very active sending invitations, as well as some individuals who are very attractive in the sense like they want to be, many people want to be part of that team, right? So we were trying to analyze these networks and see how they could be explained. So for that reason, we created two different networks. One is like the invitation network, like I want to work with you. So that's one particular network. And then we were just filtering all of those edges based on the decisions. And this is more binary decisions. So the accepted network, if this person invited that one, we want to see to what extent that was accepted or rejected, right? So
is this one-to-one collaboration or is it like a group collaboration?
Correct, good question. So like the formation was one-on-one. So let's say I want to work with you, and then you said yes, and then for example, Brennan wants to work with us. He could see us as a team. So he could send an invitation either to you or me, like, okay, I would like to be part of your team. So if both of us said yes, he will be part of our team. But yeah, it was just like very sequential in that sense. And that also brings some questions related to how the teams were assembled, right? Like, thanks for the question. So we built this idea, like we have different courses, we have 15 courses, and we were trying to create this block diagonal matrix. So the idea here is like every network was modeled as a GNCC matrix. And we were trying to understand what are the common factors that could explain the structure of these networks. So we just created across all the courses and cases that we have. So we were trying to understand this block diagonal matrix. And for that, the idea was like to take these networks and use the collaboration networks as well as like the relationships as part of like if those networks can predict, like you have social networks, if this could explain what happened in terms of invitation or acceptance networks. So we asked them basically these three questions. Who on this list? Everyone was searching for team members, completing the profiles. We asked them at the beginning, who on this list do you know? Like I know Brennan, I know Alina, I know Julian, okay. And then we asked them, who have you worked with on projects? I haven't worked with them. I only have worked with Alina. And then the last one, in order to assess friendship, and the friendship is a very tricky question, you know, like maybe I think Brennan is my friend. Maybe Brennan doesn't think the same. So in that sense, what we asked them, who on this list do you enjoy socializing? So the idea here is like we're trying to create these intersections. If you only answer, do you know this person? And that's it, that's like a weak tie. If you know them and also you have worked previously, okay, that's an intermediate strength tie. And if you have said yes for the three questions of the person, that's like a strong tie. So then basically on this idea, we have these multiple networks, different classes. We have around 800 participants who were part of like assembling teams. And we have a mix of undergrads, graduate students, people from a master's program. And in total, we have 100 teams. Balance was just majority female. The mean age was like from undergrads as well as like people who were like 40 years old, like taking this master. And the idea here is like they need to form teams based on a project. So we just modeled this network. So you see, this is the network like our dependent variable, like we want to model. And then we have all the other networks such as like the friends and collaborators, like this is the strong network, the strong tie. This is like the middle one. So we only have the collaborators. And then the last one, like the acquaintances. So we want you to see to what extent the ties could explain the formation of a tie on this layer. So for that, we use exponential random graph models. I'm still surprised that we work with ergons, but yeah, it's just like very useful method to understand the individual relational structural properties of a network. And the idea here is that we're trying to test all these hypotheses in a simultaneous network model. So in a single visualization, the idea here is like the ergons are trying to show us the probability of like a specific network structure relies based on the covariates that we have. So among all the possible random networks that we can create, what is the likelihood that this network fits with this particular one? So like we're trying to create that, and based on that, we calculate the coefficients that explain the covariates. So the idea here is that we have the probability of this network that we are simulating, and based on what we observed. And here we have this logit model, but it's basically, it's just like we have the coefficients, the parameters that we're trying to estimate, and then the vector statistics, which could include the number of edges, the number of diets, triangles, etc. And the idea here is like it's interpreted as like a logistic regression model. So like the coefficients, if it's positive, is more likely to happen than the random chance and so on. So we have a lot of attributes here. Individual level, like those are the node level, gender, age, where they come from, if they were from the US or from also overseas, their competence that they reported, psychological collectivism, if they would like to work together or not in teams, social skills, creativity, and mask personality using the mini IP, basically as openness, agreeableness, all of those. Relational level, we use those networks that I show you, so like they could explain the relationships. The structural level, in degree, out degree, to paths, and finally, we were trying to assess some Mosley effects. So based on this, we create the ergams and we run them, and it's a long table, so I'm just going to split it in different components. So for example, the first question was the strength of the tie. So the idea here is like the strength of the tie, if you have a strong tie, it's more likely that you will invite that person as well as that you will accept the person. And that's true. And that happens like if you're less likely to invite someone who just like have a weak relationship. But if you see a friend or someone very close to you, it's more likely that you will invite that person. And that happens also in the other way. So if someone is a friend of you, you already know that person very well, it's more likely you accept that person rather than someone who you barely know in this particular class. The interesting thing happens here. It's just like the number of ties. For example, I know Brennan is very well connected. So we're trying to see here, you see here that I know that Brennan has a lot of these weak ties, he's more likely to be invited. Like people are looking for Brennan because he's very well connected with others. He is very well connected with this researcher, so that makes him more attractive. But otherwise, people who have a lot of like strong friends, like those strong ties, those are less likely to be invited. And that's kind of like it is, just like, I know Brennan hangs out with all the NetSci people, and that's it, right? He doesn't go out. So why I'm going to work with Brennan so I know already the other people, right? So that makes him less attractive to team up. And on the other side, we didn't see any relevance. For example, if I'm considering someone who invited me, oh, this person is well connected or not, that doesn't make a big difference. The last part here, we're trying to understand leadership attributes, and we saw many things, like people who are very competent, who are recognized as leaders and who have social skills. Also, again, they're more likely to be invited. People acknowledge that. Interestingly, people who are younger were also more likely to be invited. And the only difference for the people who were accepting, like, okay, Brendan saw my invitation. If I'm younger, also that makes me more attractive. And also if I'm a leader, that also makes me more attracted to just say yes, right? And the last one, as you can imagine, homophily is very strong. People tend to invite, if I'm an international student, I'm inviting other international students. If I'm male, also trying to invite male and so on. But that doesn't translate to, for example, if you distinguish or not who will be part of your team. And finally, some more structural signatures. What we found is basically, at least, and this is more like part of the platform, but people are very good sending invitations, like they're very active, and that's because it just takes one click just to invite an invitation. Most people receive at least one or two invitations. And in general, like, there are some hubs in that sense, like people get a lot of invitations. Mm-hmm.
There's a question on the
Oh, sorry. Okay. Nathan. Mm-hmm.
Hey Diego, super interesting stuff. I've also read the paper here with Jackie already. I'm wondering if like an explanation for the difference between the invitation and acceptance model is the way you're measuring the strength of the ties, right? Because you're measuring have they worked together before, but in a sense we don't know if that collaboration was good or bad, right?
Correct.
So if it's been good, I'm probably going to send something a lot to people with whom it was good. But acceptance, I might also get it from people where I feel like it was maybe less good. and so my acceptance would go down. Have you looked into that? Like, do you know how much like the quality, in a sense, rather than just the quantity of those ties matters?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, unfortunately, we didn't ask them how positive was the collaboration. We only asked them, you have worked with this person, yes or no? The only thing, in order to alleviate that problem was like when we asked them if you enjoy socializing. So like the idea here is like, if you have worked with them, but also you enjoy socializing with them, that will make the strong tie. So in that sense, we're trying to capture if that was a positive tie. But if the collaboration was good or not, that's something we didn't assess. But I agree, like that could make a difference for sure. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
There was a question about,
Mhm.
so as all of us know, when we ask people, most people actually don't answer.
You're right.
So, but I saw that your teams has a very large, let's say, table structure. Is there an incentive to participate? Like you have to be.
You have to form a team, right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, right. It was part of like an educational context. So in that sense, everyone had to log in. We need to have a team by the end of the day and so on. Right. So it's we have a few cases that we tell them like there is a deadline, but you need to be part of a team. And if you have in a team, we'll just randomly assign you into a team. But in general, like, students were very active and using the platform. But yeah, I think this kind of doesn't replicate too much. Also, you're saying like in real life, an email could take weeks, for example, to be answered.
Do you have any effect about who starts, let's say, the invitation process? Like, I guess the observation during social media, people will gather around you otherwise.
Right. That's a good question. I'm trying to remember from here. I haven't checked robustness, like who were the most. I'm trying to recall. I know that these were more leaders, like people who have some kind of more social leadership skills. They were more into just send invitations. And also what I remember is like people who don't have skills, like the lack of skills or like skills were lower than average. Those were more likely to send more invitations than others because they were trying to find someone to work with. But like people, and that's the problem with this kind of studies. Like if you already know with whom you're going to work, you have no incentives, just like, oh, let's start searching, right? So like, I know I'm going to work with Alina. I just enter, send her invite, and that's it. But yeah, so people who don't have that kind of connection or like that social capital probably will do more. Yeah, that's a good question. Alina?
So were they allowed to search by name? I know that you can.
Right. This version, right. This version, we disabled that property. So they had to go through the search query.
I'm using this in my class.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Right.
So I disabled the function. So
right.
They cannot search.
Right. We disable it. So like they cannot search for names. Good. So thanks for the questions. And yeah, basically, some of the summary of this is like, yeah, strength ties is very important. Having multiple weak ties, and I just always say to the students, especially those you are like starting, you need to talk with people at conferences. You really need to make at least not good friends. At least you just need to know them, right? They need to know you too. So like that's a very important property, especially not just like in the educational context, but in academia. It's like it's very important to be well connected. That increases the chances of like you being more interesting or more attractive. The other one is like the strong ties. This is an interesting one because that seems like if people are constrained a specific social group, that makes them less likely just to be considered as a team member. And it's the same problem, like maybe because I know that I'm going to work with this person, period. Like I don't get any kind of more attention on that. And the last one, leadership, it's interesting because all these kind of qualities are offline, like people recognize you as a leader, but that translates into these systems. So we were interested in this, like, kind of the conclusions here. Social capital is very important for any kind of collaboration relationship. And although individuals look for those strong ties, what matters in the end is just like the weak ties. It's just like, it's very important. And then like being very well connected make people just more attractive to form teams and avoiding these cliques, right? So this was like one part of the work. And I think we were just interested in jumping to the second study is that, okay, this is what people do. Could we make a difference just by altering the algorithms, right? So the motivation on this, and a little bit like what Alina is working through, is like diversity of the teams. So I don't know if you saw this a few years ago, but this was like an announcement linking it about a very prestigious law firm. Basically, they were saying, this is our new class of lawyers, attorneys. And you can see here, all the people are smiling so far, but all of them are white, and there's only one female lawyer, right? So that it's so very different if you compare it to the census data, right? Like 50, or at least half of the population is female, and 72% of the population is white. And this kind of course, like, was very highly commented on, like in the news and social media, because again, just like all these elite firms, organizations, they're not encouraging or like they're not planning diversity or like having diverse groups. So, and it's important here because even like companies are trying, and probably you have taken one of those DEI forms or like training programs. A lot of the research shows that those fail. Like people don't like to be forced to work in a diverse group. People don't feel like committed or satisfied when people are forced to do something that is against their will. So the question here is, to what extent, if you change the paradigm, so rather than forcing people, like you trying to guide them better, just like to find a diversity. So this idea comes from this idea of the, sorry, when choosing, let me skip this thing. Okay, this part. So if people are searching for each other in a social system, one thing we could try to do is just like changing the ranking of the recommendations. So let's say you're searching for software developers, and you see a lot of these candidates have this property. All of them are male, and these are the 2 females. So rather than just like showing this, maybe one possible option is that we're trying to increase the visibility of this group that has lower visibility. And the thing here is like we can imagine of post-processing the recommendation leads. So this is the idea of like some fairness studies calling like the re-ranking. So the idea here is that you take the original list or rank list, and the idea here is, do you provide some norms in order to increase the visibility of those who are in the lower positions? So let's say if I decide by random, like 50%, one person of one class will be there. So 50%, the first one goes there, then the next one will be a female, the next one it will be a male, and so on. There are very many techniques. So like rather than just seeing males, I will see a more diverse options. And then of course, like new elements will show up because they were not considered previously, and so on. So will this make a difference? For example, someone who is looking for team members. And then the idea here is like, as a toy example, is that if you were using this system and you were requesting for this kind of things, right? Like I'm looking for a software engineer, and the first 2 results you see, there are 2 white people, and the last 2 are African American. So I'm sure like in terms of the numbers, they're kind of similar, but because of like maybe some structural differences, maybe the institution where they came out, or like, for example, years of experience, so on, some structural inequalities will show up in these lists. So if we trying to change whatever the user changed, and we provide what it will call like a diversity bonus. So people who increase the diversity of the team, of that person who's looking for a team member, can be different. And then we change the list. So rather than just saying, okay, this is what you asked for, I'm just saying, okay, this is what you asked for, but I'm trying to highlight these guys who increase the diversity. So for example, Brandon goes up, Kelsey, she's still there because I'm a male, so having a female member will be good. Tanya's there, and then the last one, Matthew, because he probably looks too much like me. So we tried this idea, and we operationalized diversity in 2 ways. One was like, it's called surface level, but also Scott Page in that book called Diversity Bonus, I highly recommend it. Basically, we trying to operationalize representation, identity, like demographics on one level, and that includes gender, age, ethnicity, race. And in the core, you have the diversity of thinking, which is cognitive. So all the skills, background, values, and benefits. So we're trying to operationalize a factor that we have in our system. So for example, we're trying to use the Blau index, which is trying to measure the proportions in a specific group. You can see here when the diversity is very low, all of them have the same value. If it's maximum, like for example, all of them have a different value, which is great. And we're trying that with race, gender, and ethnicity. Gender, because we assume male, female, non-binary, or prefer not to disclose. Coefficient of variation, to what extent, what specific value differ, like the distribution was different. And for that, we're trying to see, for example, if we have one person who was very good at a specific skill and the rest were not so good at that, and also we have age, so we can have at least like a variation of that. So we did a study. Basically, we test different algorithms. Then once we were sure after a simulator with some Monte Carlo simulations, we then try a design between subject experiment 2 by 2. And then we ran a lab experiment. It was on Zoom because of the pandemic. So basically the idea here was to test whether if users could choose or like they could have the option to select with whom they want to work. And then the idea here is like if we were including this diversity criteria. So we were trying to optimize the diversity of the team. So if you have no chance to choose and there was no criteria, we just select random teams. If we were thinking of increasing the diversity, we use an algorithm. So we're trying to find the most diverse teams according to the pool that we have in that session. If they could choose, but there was no diversity, we just allow them to search for whatever you want to, like whatever you want. And then last one, this will call it like the diversity bonus teams. So they were able to search, but the idea here is like the algorithm was tricked. So everyone who was just increasing the diversity of team was just going to be in a higher position. So let me go for the details. Something about the algorithm that we use. Basically, to find the most diverse teams, we just run a Pareto problem here. So a multi-optimization problem. We have a lot of random teams, and they were trying to maximize these two fronts, which were the most diverse teams. So in that area, we're just trying to find good combinations that have high cognitive diversity as well as high identity diversity. And those were just better than random. And then for the other one, which is self-assembled, as I show, basically we ask them participants, search for whatever who want. And based on this criteria, the system was trying to maximize whatever you were searching or asking for. I was trying to find the best people who fit your search query. And basically, we asked them how important was the attribute and how much was the match between that particular skill and the candidate. And that generated a ranked list. Basically, the people who were at the top fit best with the particular research, like search query. And so this will be like the outcome. Kelsey is on the top, Tanya, and so on. But then the last one, this diversity bonus, we have already the score that we computed before, and then we also computed based on these metrics that I showed you before, a score. This is a number, and then the idea is like multiplying these two scores, what you were looking for, and the diversity score, that will give a re-ranked list. And that's what we're showing. So for example, someone here in the middle probably will go up, someone in the top will go down, and so on. So it was a very complicated experiment. We opted for trying to have a holistic version of all these attributes. And we wanted to see what are the consequences. So basically the pipeline, basically they completed the survey, we explained to them the tasks they had to do. They formed their teams based on the condition. And then they have to respond to a survey, basically, how was the team that you assembled? We asked them to complete a task in breakout rooms, and finally, a final survey assessing their experience. The task was very simple. We simulated that they had to prepare materials for the American Cancer Society, and they need to create a campaign, a poster for recruiting volunteers who can just transport patients from their homes to their hospitals. So we asked them, we have judges who rated how creative were the materials that the participants created. And then this is the picture, just like this was the how we did run this experiment. We were in the lab, we have all the participants on Zoom. Each computer was connected to a breakout room, and we were just recording what each team was doing. So we have different sessions. We have about 400 people, and we have 86 teams, 20 at least in each one condition. And from there, we're analyzing the data that we got. So first result is like identity. So again, just based on the demographics, you can see here, like these are the conditions that they could choose members. And basically, providing agency affects diversity like surface level. Like agency affected negatively the surface level diversity scores. The ones who scored the high was those created by the algorithm. The lowest ones were just like those who could assemble without any guidance. With guidance, improve a little bit, but was not statistically significant than the other one. The next one, cognitive diversity, we found no differences. So kind of tell us like participants were able to find whoever was needed in their team. I really need someone who works in statistics. That's the person who I need in my team. So they were very good at that. And there were no differences. When we computed the average between cognitive and identity, we found that the most clear difference was between the algorithm, like the teams assembled by the algorithm, and the teams that they were assembled by themselves without any guidance. You see here that the diversity is much lower and statistically significant. And the last one, which is the most interesting one, is like the performance on these teams, right? So in that sense, the teams who were assembled by the algorithm didn't work well. And the problem here is like, and we can show in the results, basically people were complaining a lot, like they had no idea how to work in this team. You put them a very diverse team, they had no idea how to communicate with each other, they had no idea how to start a task. Write the transcript, we saw a lot of conflict and disagreements. So that kind of affects the performance of the team. On the other side, these are the teams who they were assembled by themselves, no guidance, but you see here the performance was the lowest. And again, probably very homogeneous teams that like constraints, the lack of creativity and so on. And the last one, these are like assembled by this idea of like giving bonuses to people who don't have that visibility. And that increased the compared to those two, that increased by a lot the performance of the team. So in that sense, the experiment resulted in having these teams, this combination of giving bonuses, but at the same time, trying to respect what you're looking for, you can choose. And that was much better than assigning to a very diverse team as well. You can see here that it's still close and similar to random teams, but the variation there was much higher. In random teams, what happens is that you have, could be a very good team, but at the same time could be a terrible team. And that's the hardest thing to do to calculate. And I think that's something that the Scout page discusses. Random teams in general, the problem is not that the performance, the average is good. It's like the variance. If you have, you can have here very good teams as well as terrible teams. All right. So conclusion here, and this is what I was telling you, has been rejected at Kai. We have trying to find a home for this work because it's like this mix between technologies as well as social behavior. But what we posted here is that agency affects negatively team diversity. If people choose whoever they want, that affects the diversity of team. And if we think about our relationships, that's kind of true. Like we're trying to team up with those who already know, like, okay, are close to us, like maybe from the same city. So that affects negatively the diversity of the team. But also forcing people like, okay, you guys need to work together because you are this, you are that, like tokenizing the team, that is also not a good solution. So I feel like in that sense, it's kind of a Goldilocks problem. So neither this, neither that. But like finding this kind of balance between people choosing or having able to find a team member, but guiding that process. It's like, you know, these are like a good candidates for your team and you should seriously consider them. That at least works much better than those two approaches. So, and yeah, I feel like I don't have the results here in the slides, but basically we found that diverse teams have like they were struggling with communication, and that was something that clearly affected the rest of the task. I don't know if you have questions about this.
Can you explain a little bit about how you modify?
Yes, so basically we have the teams creating a poster. They use Google Slides. And we asked them 10 judges to grade those based on originality, uniqueness, overall score. And then we computed those scores from a scale from 1 to 5 Likert scale. And we checked just like the consistency among the judges was fine, which was very good. And that was like our ground truth. And these were students from communication majors. So like at least have some kind of knowledge with this kind of tasks. Dylan?
The university score yourself, like, is that overall based on?
Yes. We decomposed it, and the main thing was gender. So what we saw, it was basically, and this is because of the pattern. So you could just see names, and maybe we're just inferring the genders based on the names. So that was like the big homophily effect. Like there were a lot of, especially when you can choose without guidance, there were a lot of female teams as well as a lot of male teams. We have the other metrics were race, ethnicity. Ethnicity was not so good in the sense of we didn't have enough Latinos. That was the only question. Age was not a problem. Like there were no differences in terms of age. What we just saw gender was the main factor. Thank you for the question.
You mentioned two diversities. One is the diversity and the one with the
cognitive, right?
Which one do you think is the best predictor of the differences between this agency part? Difference in the agency part?
Definitely the identity, right? That's what is like drives people, because I feel like most people are just make decisions based on the first impression. Like I see the name, I see the word kind of. We didn't check, for example, they create a profile, so they could give more details like about major things like that, but we didn't check the data. But yeah, I think identity is the most important one. And again, if you reflect on, if we reflect about how we make the teams, and that kind of goes back to, oh, are we like all of us are male, or like we really have a balanced diversity in terms of gender? And it's a very hard question, especially in science. Speaking of that, I want to jump, and I think we have time for this one, which has nothing to do with team assembly, but I really want to hear your thoughts about this, which is a paper that we are going to submit to a journal, and we have presented this at IC2S2 last summer and ICSI. So we're interested in about team composition, like how the gender composition affects the disruption of a team. If you haven't heard this idea of disruption, the idea here is to see to what extent a paper kind of change the direction of the research. So it can create a new direction in terms of the knowledge discovery. So if we think a very simple example will be transformers, right? Like transformers make this new change of line. Right now we're talking about GPT, Llama models, etc. But before what it has in transformer, we have parts of the speech, some probabilistic things. So we are not kind of forgetting those things, right? Like right now, that particular paper created a new line of research. So this has work from Funk, and also this was like highlighted by this paper of Dashun Wang, Evans, and Lin-Fei Wu, just like basically to what extent this is the focal paper, and you see the focal paper has some references citing previous work. And the question here is like the papers that are new, are they citing this paper but not considering the previous work? So this is a network metric, and basically what it tries to compute is like among all the citations that your papers that you're citing have, to what extent those overlap with the citations that you have to this paper. So for example, you have papers who are directly citing this paper, the focal one, these green ones, which is I, and they're just citing this paper. They're omitting the other ones in the past. You have these J papers, these red ones, which are citing the focal paper, but also they're citing the previous work. So it's important to consider both research works. And the last one, the K ones, these black ones, basically they are skipping this one, but it's still considering going back to what has been published before. So that is like this calculation of the disruption score. And it's like an illustration. This is from Wu's paper. Basically, disruption goes to 0 to 1. In this case, the papers who are very disruptive are original articles. Some of those are Nobel Prize. And the idea here is like they're capable of creating like a new paradigm shift. On the contrast, when it's negative, like this developmental work, like you're still building in previous work, so people continue referencing to what was done before. So those are review articles, articles here in previous work, development articles. There's nothing good or bad against them. It's just like different kind of work in scientific. So what we're trying to do is like, we know that teams size is important. Larger teams usually are more developmental. Smaller teams are more disruptive. We also know like fresh teams, so you have younger researchers, that also makes the team more disruptive. We're interested in what is the effect of gender. If you have more female or fewer female members, like that makes a difference. So we have the data set, which is obtained from SciSciNet. This is from the Shun's group. Like they took Microsoft Academic Graph, same as OpenAlex. So they were taking the data and they were putting more data from NSF on other research guides. Also, they added the disruption score, the sleeping beauty scores, and so on. So we have all the features of the papers. We also, the same data set provides the gender classification, which is based on this cultural model idea, and this is developed by Aaron Cosset. The idea is just like based on the name, you're trying to infer a likelihood of this author being female or male, and gives us like a probability. So we're taking those papers that we clearly know with this percentage, it was 60% if they were female, 40% they were considered male. We have 65 million papers obtained on data set that have disruption score, and we analyzed from 1950 to 2010. And we're also trying to do the same analysis with patents data. And the patents data is much harder because 0.19% of the patents have a team with only female researchers. It's super hard. So like, we found a category which is drugs and patents, drugs and medicine, and that one has a better balance because, and I will show you that. So we're trying to analyze the proportion of how much disruptive, highly disruptive work, the top 5%, was generated by women and was generated by men. So this is like what we said, papers, patents. We calculated the proportion of female researchers in the team, and then we just calculated the proportion. So The first result here, basically, if we compare how much research all female teams do compared to the rest, females are just doing more disruptive work. And this is going up of the decades, and you see here the difference between the blue lines, just like all male teams, and the green ones are 50-50%. So overall, what we found is like female teams are just making more disruptive research across the time, and that like it's going up, having increasing, and actually by the end of this, like the difference was about 32% female compared to male, and 86% between all female versus mixed teams. So we're interested. Okay, it seems like female are more disruptive in general, like they're proportionally working or creating more disruptive work compared to male.
So what's the vertical axis? Percentage of disruptive?
Right, this is the percentage of disruptive papers.
Within.
So we calculate the ratio between what the top 5% of disruptive versus all the rest of work generated by those kinds of teams. Because the other thing is like, if you see the raw numbers, this is like work done by men, by women, but like the problem here is like the proportion of women is just much lower than men. So we're just trying to calculate that in terms of their relative percentages. So we did this not just like only women, only male, balance. We also tried with different percentiles. So if there was a majority team and so on. And you can see here that it's still consistent. So when the team has a majority where a lot, like the females are the majority, that also disruption goes up. Like that trend is still persistent. And the next one is like when you have a majority team led by male, right? And the thing here is like all these kind of in the middle, like weak majorities, you have 60-40%, 50-50. The disruption doesn't go so high as compared to the other ones. We did this with we're trying to check different factors here. It was about an age, it was about team size, so on. So like one question here was about age. So for example, maybe younger female researchers are more disruptive, or like just the older female and so on. So what we did here is like we separated all female, all male, and we were just comparing here based on their age. So what we found basically, young female researchers are more disruptive compared to the others. And there could be different explanations for this. It's just like, we saw that in general, like younger teams produce more disruptive work, that in that moment, or like, you know, they have the momentum because of like the tenure, whatever it is. But in general, like that goes much better for women. We also analyzed by team size, and based on this paper, like large, small teams, we also found consistent results. Like smaller teams are more disruptive than larger teams. You see like the trend goes down. But what was interesting here is like these are the 50-50s, these are the all male, and these are female. So again, all female are just being more disruptive in general, like especially small teams. Like those are more disruptive than all male or 50-50%. We also tried, this is the most interesting finding, like there's previous research that shows male in general are more cited than women, right? Like women have less visibility, they have less recognition. So when we analyze this idea that the most cited paper, like the most cited work, the top 5, we saw that that's consistent. So like basically you have the most cited work is usually when you have an all majority, like a majority male team. And then you see how the trend goes down. So like the work done by all females usually goes down by a lot, but there's the opposite trend if you check disruption. So in general, like disruption is much higher when you have female teams. When there's this weak majorities, it's not so much, but when you have an all male majority team goes up. But in that sense, it's the opposite trend. So this was like interesting. And then, okay, maybe they don't have that visibility, but also they're working on things or ideas that are revolutionary or new, or like they're not so validated, and that's why I need more time. We were trying to make some potential explanations of this. Why is this happening? So we were just analyzing some kind of proxies. One idea is like females have better leadership skills than men. So one proxy was saying, let's try to identify the most senior member of the team based on H index. So if we identify which is the most senior member, and if we compare across different team compositions, this is like majority male, majority female. What we found consistently across is that when you have a female researcher who is the most senior one, they have more disruptive work, whether if it's just like a majority of male or a majority female. Just having a male senior researcher there in team, that would just decrease the disruption scores by a lot. So this could be potentially one idea of like why, for example, having a female who is the leader, like that kind of changed the factor. We also checked with first author, last author, but unfortunately, like there are differences that has to be seen by fields. And for example, another question was, is this about survival bias, right? Like women who stay in academia, usually they're the most smartest because they decide to stay in academia, so they spend more time there. And actually, this is the opposite trend. So like you have here, these are like all female teams that create like the most disruptive work, and then even like higher 0, and the non-disruptive ones. So basically what we found, women or like all female teams working on very disruptive work, they have shorter average career lengths, like ages. They work less in academia compared to women or all team females, like they're working on developmental or more standard research. And that's the opposite for men. Men is like working in that kind of more discovery, like more like breakthrough stage. They have longer ages in terms of careers, but it's not so bad or different like compared to ones who are working in development. Another idea was like to see if there were differences in terms of what they're working on. Like you see, for example, medicine, basically we use kind of embeddings here. So we kind of took the abstracts, creating like this, like reduce the dimensions, so trying to see if we can distinguish what kind of work they were doing. And you can see here, medicine, clearly women, like the red dots, are working on fields and areas like men are not necessarily covering. And when we just check the papers here, a lot of it comes with women's health, like pregnancy. There's one paper here, the prevalence of eating disorders in elite female athletes, a lot of like sexual transmission diseases and so on. And for example, as a comparison here, you have history, which is a field like there is no big gender gap. Usually the proportion of female participants as researchers, I mean, it's not so different. And you can see there's like a more dispersion, like there's no like clusters in that sense. What we found also is interesting is like in some fields like computer science and chemistry, there are still like some silos. Like there are some topics that female researchers are working more precisely compared to, for example, other men. And Aaron Closet, I remember this paper that they published recently. It's like, yeah, like there are some differences in terms of how female researchers are more likely to work in these subfields than others. And for example, we'd like to hear more like other fields like chemistry, which probably there are some differences too. So some conclusions here. With this, I want to wrap up. But basically, it's clear like all female teams are taking and explore areas, like trying to resolve these gaps that haven't been ignored for a long time. And that's the questions like what it has to be. So for example, while they're driving disruption, maybe that doesn't come along with more citations, more rewards, more visibility. So to policymakers, like the question is like, for example, in order to ensure this kind of work, what are kind of the things or distinctions that we need to make? Like for example, we know that female teams or female researchers have more challenges to stay in academia or like to work in terms of the Matilda effect and many other things. So to what extent academia and like institutions need to consider that or to strengthen their support? And in that sense, anything that could work just to highlight, increase the leadership of women should be encouraged. The last thing, and again, consistent with, for example, this paper that Shun also published a few years ago about the COVID, like COVID affected mostly caregivers, mothers, people taking families. So to what extent administrators and academics need to take more policies to encourage flexibility, support, and recognition of female researchers. With that, I finish. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer those.
Okay. Questions for Diego? We have today. I know there's been feedback that the people online can't hear questions. So.
Yeah, the question, yeah, the next one.
Oh, very interesting.
the last part I need because I was asking.
Yes, right. Yes, sir.
But I have a question about what do you think is all female? I mean, the actual source a couple of months ago, you have only 80% female, or even 70% female, the effect actually drops.
Right.
What do you think is all female?
And also that goes kind of goes back to, for example, when you have a majority male, and we saw it's not like, I feel like it's not about the number of females, like it's not linear, this relationship. I think one question is to what extent the majority effect would be an explanation. So you have a female majority, so they have more power, or like more distant to talk or like create or ideate, compared to, for example, have 50-50, which there is no clear leadership or skill, or just like the recognition of which should be allowed to talk first, and so on. We don't know precisely that. That's why we're interested in studying more like the mechanisms of this. And I point out to a lot of like the collective intelligence research on this, right? So it's like silent insights, like there's no clear idea why the majority works better than a minority, or like when you have half, that doesn't work out. But yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's something related to the majority effect, but we don't have a clear answer for that. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk, very interesting. I have one question related to, you saw that all males were filling the gaps, so research in medicine, for instance. I was wondering if you studied that for different years, like you started in 1960s, like what were all female teams? Were they were also filling gaps back then?
That's a good question. By the way, great recognition to Nandini Banerjee. She has led this work. So we haven't done the analysis. I would interesting just like to see if there are, for example, structure differences. Like we took all the decades together to create the plot. But yeah, it will be interesting to see, okay, how much was different in the 50s, 60s, 70s. We're trying to do some decades, and we kind of, one thing what we know is like the proportion of women is going up, like across the decades. Decades like 50s, 60s were very low, but we could double check if that was the main reasons. Like, for example, in the 50s, they were still like trying to fill out those gaps compared to what we know more recently. Yeah, that's a good insight.
A question on this similar topic. But do you think the female only teams are the role, so like majority male teams or other teams, since that you feel opposite of your majority male, men would go somewhere?
If can you repeat the question? So
currently there's more research, so now teams more
right.
And there's a complementary effect involving
right. Yeah.
Or something about like
it's a good point. I'm trying to interpret it in this way, if it's like in that sense, because right now women seem more like complementary, because usually the proportion is still 80-20, especially in medicine. Sorry, medicine is more balanced, but like in STEM, for example, it's just like the proportion stuff. I cannot say the opposite is true if it's just like when you have a field, because there is no field in which you have more women than male. Like across all the fields, it's just like it could be a balance 60-40, but it's still led by men. But there's no field like you have, more women than men. So that's kind of hard to test. One idea that I have is like, because probably men never explored, haven't tested these ideas, and that's why women like started making and becoming leaders there. So to what extent that trend will start like stabilize? So there will be a certain point, like, and God willing, like you have 50-50%. Like there's good balance, and because of that, some fields like it happens that like you have 50-50, but then there's no kind of ownership, or like you cannot claim this. So maybe that could be some kind of potential scenario in the future, but I don't know. Still, it's a good counterfactual question.
I have one from Sarah online.
Hi, Sarah.
It's a two-part question. One of them is just if you could talk more about the construct validity of the disruption index. Like, you can imagine there's differences in citation numbers that apply through.
Right.
Second part of the question is whether, if you look at those citations, more female teams cite teams with more female authors as well.
So the first question, we normalize disruption scores per field. So in that sense, we're trying to consider that into account, like, right, the disruption scores change across, like, for example, medicine is usually the most disruptive. Chemistry is very developmental, so we normalize them all. And it's true, for example, there's these patterns like who cites based on gender, like male select more male compared to women, right? So we don't have, we haven't rebuilt, like, for example, from the network metric, who cited whom, and that will be interesting to see. I remember in terms of the validity of the disruption score, I know there are two bands here. One is like, yeah, this is a valid metric because when they posted this in the small, larger teams, they were testing different robustness checks, including, for example, selecting a list of what they consider very disruptive, very developmental, and they were consistent with evaluations of experts. But I know that, for example, on the other band, the disruption scores is very skewed. So it's like many of those papers don't have any disruption score. So like, it's just like very small tails on the left, on the right. So that makes the disruption score more questionable. And that's why I know that the researcher from Indiana University, why he's just working on like creating an alternative metric for this, which seems more like a normal distribution. And that could be interesting to explore with that score. Thank you for the question, Sarah.
Maybe one last question is about the API for estimating gender of authors. Is there any systematic, like nationalities or author backgrounds that is less accurate on?
It's hard to, and that's a good point, because there is no ground truth. Like the ground truth will be if everyone could just reveal or like disclose their gender, right? Like this is at least when we try different methods, like NumScore is another one, an API, but kind of many of them like are claiming that it's based on the names, and there are some cultural properties there. So I think to what extent the results are valid or not, the only thing we could try to do is just like be more like different thresholds. So it's like we were trying to be very strict, like 90% and 10%. So we are clearly sure that these are females and these are male, and still the patterns were consistent. So I think, yeah, how valid is that? Probably, right, that's a good question. All right, guys, thank you again for your attention and time. I know time is scarce these days, but yeah, thank you again. Thank you.
You have the same results by field. Like,
yeah, so the field is a little bit different.